have with Professor Peter Newman all the way from Australia here in our happy little downtown to talk about transportation and mobility and share with us all that he knows about good city building. First, I want to thank DramaWorks Theater for again hosting us so generously and graciously. Thank you, DramaWorks, for again helping us really advance the forward. If you haven't seen a show here, it's a must. You know, the place is a gem. Obviously, you can look around and see what you have here, but what is produced on this stage is really exceptional. And my wife and I have been here a few times. It's really a great show, great place. Please don't hesitate to come. You can talk to Laura Wagner right there. She can tell you how to get tickets. West Palm Beach has benefited greatly, I think, from good urban planning, from good city planning. And it goes back a few decades, but all the way back to the Newman plan and how this city was laid out originally gave us some really good bones to work with. And thankfully, a lot of that, at least east of I-95, is intact. And as we know, so much of what makes a city work right is how people can move through it. People and goods can move through a space. And with the downtown as its core and the traditional neighborhoods around it, West Palm has really thrived as a place where density, walkable neighborhoods, multimodal transportation systems are working and only getting better every day. The city has worked hard at it for years. The DDA has been part of that. The private sector has been part of that. We're seeing now All Aboard Florida or Brightline building a rail station right here in our downtown, which is a huge opportunity, not just for our city, but for the region. We are increasingly seeing modal split, people choosing not to drive their cars in our downtown. 30% of people who come to downtown West Palm Beach do so without a car. Or I should say 30% of people who are at businesses and events in downtown are there without a vehicle. Part of that is due to the 6,000 or 7,000 residential units, but a lot of people are getting here by bike, by foot, by train, by bus, by trolley, by Uber. And we are, I think, in many ways leading within the region at helping people move through urban places without their private vehicles. All that being said, where I think we're going is that the leadership of the city, the private sector, the community has really embraced this concept, maybe giving us an advantage over some of our neighbors. And I'm excited at the opportunity to bring people like Professor Newman in to give us even more ammo, to help us move the ball further down the road. And I want to thank John Rennie, a new West Palm Beach resident with some pretty serious credentials in his own right, for helping make this happen. And Nilsa Zacharias with the Palm Beach County Planning Congress, Nilsa, and I think it's my job now to get off the stage and bring you up, or introduce you to come up and say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'm Nilsa Zacharias, and on behalf of the Palm Beach Planning Congress, I welcome you to this extraordinary event. It's such a privilege to have you, Dr. Peter Newman, between us presenting your book. And it's an honor to be in such a great company. And I can assure you that all of us is truly looking forward to your presentation, to reading your book. In fact, I just bought your book, so I definitely will be reading your book. So, in any case, we welcome you to this event, and we welcome to all of you for making time to be part of this history in the making. Professor Peter Newman, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. My name is John Rennie. I am a new professor at Florida Atlantic University in the School of Urban and Regional Planning, and I'm the director of the Center for Urban and Environmental Solutions. I want to thank Raphael for his support, the DDA, in helping to get behind this event. You know, that is our role as planning educators, is to bring exciting speakers and create exciting community engagement opportunities to talk about the future of what our city can become and how to make it more sustainable. It was about 15 years ago that I was an undergraduate student, and I sat in a place not dissimilar to this theater here at the Boulder Public Library in Colorado, and I listened to Peter Newman speak. At the time, he had just come from the White House, where he had launched his book with Vice President Al Gore on sustainability in cities, overcoming automobile dependence. And when I was sitting as a student in the audience, I knew that I wanted to get to know him, and I wanted to emulate the kind of work that he does, because I think at the end of this presentation, you'll learn that Peter is not your typical academic. Peter is, I've had the great fortune now of working with Peter since I first went to Australia in 2001, and have been back and forth about 8 times since. And I've had Peter come and speak at several different events in the United States over the years, and even had the fortune to spend a Christmas together with my family in New York about 7 or 8 years ago. And what Peter does is he brings everything together as an academic, as an activist, and as somebody who has worked in government to make all of this stuff happen, to make our cities more sustainable. I'm not going to read through all of his credentials because they're too long, but what I will say is just a few highlights. When I first went to work with Peter in 2001, he was just about to begin a secondment to be a sustainability advisor to the state government, and he crafted the first statewide sustainability plan in the world that looked at all aspects of sustainability, not just land use and transportation, but looked at interacting with indigenous communities and creating more equity. Went back in 2004 and 2005 and worked on some exciting projects. My wife did her master's in sustainability, sustainable development under his direction, looking at various aspects of sustainability. You know, the Great Recession it impacted the whole globe. Around the world, Peter may use the word GFC, the global financial crisis. And it's been something that obviously causes some pains, but as Peter will talk about, there's these waves of innovation. And what's come out of the Great Recession, and Richard Florida, who many of you probably read his work, he commented in a book that he called The Great Reset, came out a few years ago, that the spigot of urban sprawl was turned off by the Great Recession. So as a community within a region, we have to look at how the world is changing. And one of two things will happen. We'll try to continue to go in the status quo, which is auto-dependence and sprawl. And if we choose that path, or if we don't take the other path, we as a region will economically stagnate, and we will be surpassed by other places like Denver and Austin and Seattle and many, many other global cities that are embracing these concepts. The other path that we can take is to embrace these concepts. And what will happen if we do that is that our economy will continue to grow. Young people will want to move here. They'll want to have families here. They'll want to stay here because it's really all about quality of life. So with that said, it is my distinguished pleasure to introduce to you Professor Peter Newman.
Well, thank you. John is highly credentialed. Two things. You heard the term transit-oriented development. He owns that. No, quite literally, he owns it. He bought it. Secondly, he can actually play the didgeridoo. You should have him down here on the stage at some point. I'm really glad to be in Florida. I have spent many years in the US teaching and working. Never been to Florida. So this is the first time, and John has had me on many trains since my arrival. And this morning I was privileged to see the Brightline people and to get a bit of insight into how this is happening. A private rail proposal. It is quite historic, and it is exactly where I think we are globally to be in a situation of saying there is now such a market for our ideas about transit-oriented development and urban rail. There's plenty of chairs. Come in. And I met this afternoon with the South East Florida TOD working group, with lots of people working in the private sector and from the various levels of government, and it was very impressive to see the commitment and energy to making this area very special. And it could be. Now the context, let me just show you the way in which we've been looking at climate change for a start, and the greenhouse gases that are overwhelming us. This is the kind of picture we used to have. It's totally out of control, going up. Coal and oil, it's out of control. And global politics just seems to be too slow. So what can we do about it? It just seems too hard. It's out of control, and nothing much gets changed. That's the feeling we've had for some time. Well, let me show you some good news. For the first time in industrial history, greenhouse gases went down globally, whilst wealth went up. We've had the odd time of, like the GFC here, where it went down, but this time it's gone down. It's gone down 2%, whilst wealth went up something like 3 to 4%. So we are decoupling the use of fossil fuels from wealth. We do not need the fossil fuels anymore to get a wealthier world. And we do need to grow in wealth because there's a lot of poverty still that needs to be addressed. And that's a major issue. So we have something going for us, finally. Now, if you look at the various places in the world which have started this decoupling, a place like Denmark, it was back in the 90s when coal started going down and oil started going down. And at the same time, wealth was growing. So now it's very decoupled, and you've got every indication that we can keep going on this trend, keep reducing this to zero, whilst getting wealthier. That's certainly the experience in most of the European countries, which have shown leadership in this area now for 2 decades. In the US, the last 7 years, both coal and oil have been going down. And with a little bit of a blip here, it hasn't stopped your economy. You are phasing out fossil fuels. And you don't hear that very much, do you? But it is happening. This is Australia. We're the world's biggest producer of coal, and we export most of it. and it's going down, and oil has stabilised. It certainly hasn't stopped our economic development either. Now I can go through a number of countries. China is decoupling. Coal is going down for the first time in the last year. So these are encouraging signs, but the interesting thing is to say, how is this happening? And what can we do about it? The best way I've found to explain it, and that's not in my new book, it's a new idea really, this idea of disruptive innovations come from Clayton Christensen at Harvard. It's about transformative and rapid change. It's actually going quicker than many people think, the decline of fossil fuels. And it's driven by demand. It's not as though we're running out of them, we're actually not needing them anymore. And what I'm saying in this book is that the demand now is for solar energy, wind energy, and reduced car dependence in cities. That's what is mainstreaming, that's what the demand now is. And it's mostly driven by cities. That's national data I showed, but it's actually cities that are driving this agenda. So how then do we build our 21st century cities so we don't have what Christensen has called stranded assets? Stranded assets are where you have invested in something and you can no longer use it because the demand has shifted away. So coal is the first thing, and the key thing to see here is that although governments have recently signed up for reducing coal and oil, the processes began some time ago. The bankers and financiers back in the early part of this century said, we have got to invest in renewables because that's going to be expanding. That's something that we can invest our money in. And coal and gas, which are used, this is power investment, started going down around this time, and renewables investment is now 2 to 1 over coal and gas. Now my city in Perth is 2 million people. It's not seen to be a world's great leader, but in the last 7 years we've had an economic boom at the same time as the world was struggling economically because of the global financial crash. What do you call it? The Great Recession. So what did, for a time there, we were the wealthiest city in the world. It was a bit crazy, $6 coffees and hugely expensive housing that you couldn't leave. So what we spent our money on was solar. Suddenly, ordinary people had extra money. What had they invested in? They bought rooftop solar for their household. So nearly 200,000 households in Perth bought this. There was no government plan, no concessions. They bought it because the market was there and they liked it. It fitted, it was a demand. So 25% of Perth homes have them, and now the biggest power station in Western Australia is rooftop solar. That's how dramatically a transformative disruption can happen, and why it's significant to say something about my hometown in this, not because it's no great thing that we planned, it just happened, and we just happened to have the money. So the minister responsible, who's a strong conservative, believes in the market more than government, he said, well, that's it, folks. We know what the future's going to be. It's going to be more and more rooftop solar. There'll be 70% of homes with rooftop solar in no time, and commercial interest as well. We will never have to build another power station. And this is in a growth state. He says it's inevitable. So that means coal and even the more recent, smaller gas-fired power stations are going to be stranded. Now, what happened in the beginning of our boom time was that the government utility the power company took out an old coal-fired power station that had been mothballed and fixed it up, spent $500 million fixing it up, and never even turned it on. That power station you can buy for $1 if you want to ship it over here. But the reality is, it's stranded. Now, the utility had no idea this was going to happen. And many utilities haven't planned for this. Their models all said, well, they're getting wealthier, so they'll need more power. They didn't. They bought it themselves. So it's a different world that's emerging. And there's a new development now with a land development company that's committed for 100 units to build it with solar and batteries. The battery part of it is very important, and it will have electric vehicles as well. And a citizen utility will be set up to manage that energy. It will be the strata title company. It's the shared ownership of the buildings, because you have shared roofs on these medium density developments. They will be the utility that will manage the new form of energy. And they will be exporting more energy than they consume. So they'll be regenerating the surrounding area. Stranded assets are happening. This is the biggest coal company in the world. Peabody filed for bankruptcy. They were also the company that funded all the climate skeptic research, so I didn't worry too much about them disappearing. Is oil being disrupted? Coal, you can kind of imagine now, but what about oil? How's it happening? We are decoupling car use from wealth. And this is certainly being driven by our cities. This is data that we've collected on our cities in our global cities database, and car use per unit of GDP is going down. So we're getting wealthier and using cars less. So this is the new book, and it essentially takes this idea and gives the basis for it and explains it and says how we now need to expand on this kind of action. Now, it's the third book in a trilogy. I didn't set out to write a trilogy, but it's just happened that way. The first one, Cities and Automobile Dependence, someone came up to me in Boulder the other day and said, "You changed my life when you wrote this book." And it certainly changed mine, that's for sure. We were a couple of guys in Perth that like to travel, and so we went around the world and collected data for the first time on 32 cities, compared them in how they used cars, how they used fuel, the kind of infrastructure, what was it that made the difference, and the land use patterns. So we actually defined automobile dependence as the term we dreamed up to explain the difference in these cities. And we said essentially what has to happen is that cities must reorient their transport priorities and re-urbanise our cities. It seemed sensible to us, and we wrote it up into an article in the Journal of the American Planning Association in the same year, 1989. It came out, and not long after that, a response was written. This was it. NCAVE. Didn't like to use our words too much, our names. NK have written a troubling paper. Their distortions are not innocent, because the uninformed may use them as ammunition to support expensive plans for a central city revitalisation and rail transit projects. Wouldn't that be terrible? Or stringent land use controls in a futile attempt to enforce urban compactness. Perhaps NK would be well advised to seek another planet, preferably unpopulated, where they can build their compact cities from scratch with solar-powered transit. That sounds pretty good to me. We had no idea what had hit us. We just were sort of making sense out of some data, and all of a sudden we were seen to be socially rejects. And it took me a long time to discover that Gordon and Richardson worked for a university that was built out of the profits of urban sprawl. But it was on, the debate, very much on. We now had set up what the problem was. Automobile dependence is something that needed to be addressed. And so the second book, which John mentioned, was launched in the White House at a time when the US finally thought that sustainability was a good word, because Ronald Reagan actually banned the word sustainability from all government activity, and it was coming back, so that was what we called it. But overcoming automobile dependence was the key idea, that there is a whole range of cities around the world that are starting to address the empire. They are coming to terms with the problem. They are overcoming automobile dependence. And we had 100 cities in our database by then. And we should have seen that there was a distinct trend in car use per capita. It was going down, and it was really heading into zero territory. But that was a bit hard for us to imagine. We should have seen it. But in fact, it did go beyond and start declining. So that's what the third in the trilogy is about, is essentially that the battle has been joined, and it is very hard to come across any planner or any city that says, we want to be more car dependent. We don't need public transport. We don't need to be more compact. We love urban sprawl. You know, these are the issues that have been addressed in the past 30 years. And it's not as though everything's finished by any means. We've got a lot of cars still. But actually the data is now showing that we're winning. So car use per capita began going down in the US 2004, 2005, and significant reductions have happened. There's a little bit of a blip at the end going up, but essentially it's a very significant turning point. That was the first data that came out worldwide to show this change. But then we discovered that all the cities in the developed world were the same. These are all the Australian cities. You see 2004-5, this is Canberra, this is Perth, Sydney's down the bottom, but all of them, including the smaller cities, began declining in per capita car use. And if you look at this graph in particular, car use, vehicle kilometres of travel per vehicle, just went down dramatically. Now, none of the models of the economists and the transport planners predicted this. If you're getting wealthier, you'll use cars more. We didn't. Something happened. We changed. The modelers, the traffic planners, have done this in Australia with that data. They said, well, it won't keep going down, surely. I mean, all our models suggest that if we're getting wealthier, we'll use cars more, so it'll go back up again, like this. This is the only way they can cope with it. How else? I mean, are you saying that we're going to start closing lanes down on freeways and things? I mean, couldn't do that. That really does look silly, and I wrote an article about that, and they were very upset with me, because that's what the models say. Well, we need to come to terms with finding out what is it that's going on, and that's what our book's about. The causes: peak density decline, that cities are coming back in, cultural change, especially with the millennials, travel time benefits are now moving to rail, cars are hitting the Marchetti wall, I'll explain that, and urban space efficiencies in the knowledge economy, that people actually need face-to-face contact after all. So, peak density decline. This is our density data. It was been going down for a century.